Right, so I'm out here on the streets of the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. I'm in an area that is known to be a place that students from across Africa who are studying here in Kenya tend to congregate. I'm hoping to speak to them to find out if they are interested in scientific research.
My name is Junior Michael.
At the moment, are you interested in scientific research? Is it something you try and keep informed about?
I am interested in scientific research, but it really depends on the situation. But as of right now, no, none.
Why are you not interested in it?
Because I haven't found a good enough topic. And the people who usually explore their research, they don't explore in a way that can interest other people to engage in it more.
Now you are a university student here in Nairobi, and what do you think scientific researchers can do to get you more interested in their work?
Approach it in a better, engaging way.
Okay, here's one of your other friends. Hi, how are you? And are you interested in scientific research?
Not really.
Why not?
It's just boring for me, yeah.
What do you think can be done by researchers to get you more interested in the work that they do?
I guess simplifying it, not all of us have like scientific minds, so I guess simplifying it better, yeah.
All right, and your colleague here. Hi, what's your name, and are you interested in scientific research?
Hi, my name is Noah. I'm not that interested in scientific research. I found that boring and difficult to understand. Yes.
What do you think can be done to get research? What do you think can be done to get you more interested in scientific research as a student?
Maybe make it more simple to people like us to understand, because some words also are difficult to get. That's the main thing for me.
All right, thank you. And on to your friend here. Hi, what's your name? And are you interested in scientific research? Is it something you follow up on?
Okay, my name is Irakoze David Frank. And personally, I'm a computer science major, so I can say I'm interested in scientific researchers, especially technologically related scientific researchers.
What do you think can be done for those researchers to get students such as your colleagues here more interested in their work?
Okay, personally, I can say, first of all, reduce the complexity of the scientific researches that are being done, because not all of us are that familiar with the technical terms. And secondly, I can say, I think it's also because of the education system. It not really promotes the sciences, and it's not science related or science oriented, meaning it usually bores people, or usually people see it as a complex subject related to other subjects such as humanities and yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Welcome back to Africa Science Focus, the science and development show from SciDevNet. I'm Ogechi Kianyao. In this episode, we discuss how to make complicated scientific research easy to understand for everyone. You just heard our reporter Michael Kaloki talk to some African students on the streets of Nairobi, Kenya. They told us why people struggle to connect with scientific research, and they say it's because it's often too technical and can be boring. This disconnect prevents people from benefiting from scientific discoveries. Science communication is a way of bridging this gap and making sure ordinary people can learn from research. But why is it important for people to understand scientific research? Michael spoke with Bosede Afolabi, a Nigerian professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the College of Medicine, University of Lagos, to find out.
So, one of the most important aspects of scientific research is actually the dissemination of the research. It doesn't make sense for research to be done and placed on the shelves and nothing to be done about it afterwards. And it's one of the areas where, because it's so important, a whole new discipline was created for it, known as implementation science. And that's one of the disciplines within the center that I run at the University of Lagos. So what we try to do is to ensure that we bridge the gap between the research being done and the knowledge from the research being applied, directly to the public and the people that need it, the patients, the public, and the healthcare workers themselves. It's really, really crucial that research is disseminated, because if it isn't, then what you've done is to essentially use a lot of funds, resources, time to create something that's going to sit on the shelf, as opposed to help humanity, which is the ultimate and necessary goal.
Now that we know why science communication is important, what challenges do researchers face when trying to share their work? Michael discussed this with science journalist Jackie Opara-Fatoye, the Deputy Regional Coordinator for SciDevNet Sub-Saharan Africa English.
There are a lot of challenges. And the one thing that I would talk about is language barrier. There are a lot of, because most of the researchers are in English, and that now knocks off people that they are non-English speakers. Then again, the technical jargons are quite a lot, because you see the specialized languages that is written, and that makes it very difficult for non-experts to comprehend. And importantly is lack of media coverage. Science reporting is not usually a priority in local media outlets. So you see a lot of people rather want to cover business or cover politics. Then science is just, limited at the back burner. And also, because researchers too, may not prioritize media or public engagements or, public outreaches. They limit themselves too, because they, really don't want to, or find it difficult to prioritize public outreach or talking to the media with their necessary skills and to effectively communicate their work. You see them, shying away from coming to the media or storifying their researches and kind of, have a balanced outlook in your research and the media, and not intertwining their work with the media, thinking that the media is not part of what they should do. So that limits, that's a lot of challenge for them, and it actually limits the work that they do. But then funding as well. Funding is another big challenge for communicating science to the public. You see that, funding is really, really limited, especially talking in the Africa's, science landscape. You see that they have limited or no funding for public engagement and media, and you see that really affects their working way in more ways than they think. So, even though there are efforts to bridge this gap, more work is needed to make this research accessible and, understandable to a broader audience.
Now, Jackie, you are also a science communicator by profession. If I could ask, who is a science communicator?
Interesting. You see, the thing now about science communication is that anybody can actually be a science communicator. But then for specialized science communication, is really an individual that shares science information and research findings with various audiences, such as maybe the general public, the media, policymakers, and, other stakeholders. The primary goal is to make science accessible, understandable, and engaging for non-experts, because the work is enormous, because now we have to be the ones to simplify the technical jargon and simplify the understanding of the research output. So, and, because we now work closely with the scientists or researchers who share their work, we work closely with science journalists. I'm a science editor, even if I'm also a science communicator and journalist as well. And we also work with, government agencies. We speak to them. We try to speak on every side, in a way to bridge that gap, to continuously bridge the gap and make sure that science is communicated effectively to all people, because science is an aspect that people do not take too seriously, but science is actually what would save the world. That's how I say it, because the scientists do quite a lot of work that people don't even know about, that if all the problems that, especially in Africa, that people talk about, there's a scientist that is already doing something about it, and we don't even know. No matter how simple it is, as simple as even bed nets, as simple as like the simplest thing you can think of, a scientist somewhere is doing work on it. So it means that if we take science seriously and put it on the front burner, most of the problems we speak about would be solved. I mean, science has contributed a lot to humanity, and it's really important that we have more science communicators to be able to effectively communicate this.
Now, what communication strategies can or should a researcher on the continent use to ensure that the ordinary citizen understands their research study as well as the impact the study would have on them?
There are quite a lot of strategies that can be used. Number one thing I always talk about is stories. Is storifying your research. You know, when you share personal stories or to illustrate the research and the impacts that it does, it makes it easy for people to connect with you. You know, when you're done with everything you're doing, then you are coming now to simplify, even using yourself as an example or using the people that you use as in your research, and share personal stories about what you have done and the impact is going to make. If it's making impact already, the impact is making, then you just make it easier for everybody to relate with you. Because if you are doing science and people are not able to relate to it in their everyday lives, it's going to be difficult for them to understand what you are doing. Then community engagement is very important, that you engage with people through maybe town hall meetings, focus group, public. When you go to public events, you make sure that you engage, you network with people. For media outreach, you just need to collaborate with the local media outlet. You share your findings on social media. You try to utilize all the social media platforms to share your research update, your findings, the things that you do. Then, use very simple languages like we always say. I think that's one thing we hamper upon, that is very important, that you use, simple language, simplify your language. And, just let's leave the big grammar for your mates. But when it comes to speaking to people and telling people, trying to get people to understand what you are doing, it's important that you simplify your language. Then you collaborate. You collaborate with local organizations, NGOs, community groups that will, to help you amplify your research findings. Then within public lectures is one thing that researchers have to find a way to tap into, because when you go for events and there are public lectures, you just take your time to look at whatever event, symposium going around, and try to tap into it to be one of the speakers or anything, to make sure that you use that opportunity to talk about your research findings. Then you try to also connect with the media. You participate in radio or TV interviews, because you need a broader reach, especially if these people are your audience. Number one, you have to really actually understand who your audience are, where your audience are, what they like to hear. Then you hack into that and make sure that you are using those platforms where you want them to, you can reach them to speak about your research. And because when you do that as well, it helps you get feedback. It helps you get feedback on what the people want, how your research is affecting them, and what other things that needs to be done for them to, understand your research, and for your research to also make impact on people's lives, communities, on their livelihoods in general.
Teboho Mofokeng, a lecturer in water engineering at the University of Cape Town, South Africa, used broadcast media and worked with local communities to share her research on the future of water in Africa. She tells us about the impact this has had.
What I was investigating was there are a few coastal towns in South Africa where the water that's used in households for bathing, washing, flushing toilets is actually discharged to the sea without any treatment. And what we wanted to understand is whether, given the fact that those coastal cities are growing and we need water for new households to be built, would those communities consider using lower quality water, meaning water that is not the same standard as drinking water, but if you were to use it, you wouldn't get sick. So would they be willing to use lower quality water for flushing toilets? And in doing that, make sure that the more expensive drinking water is available to allow more houses to be built. And what we wanted to understand was what kind of qualities would influence the choices. By qualities, I mean if the water has a color, if it has a smell, if it has a cost, if we gave it at a discount. And we also wanted to understand if they would be interested in not discharging to the sea. In other words, protecting the environment. And in those choices, we wanted to understand to what extent did their awareness of water supply, limitations of additional developments because of insufficient water, that level of awareness, and whether they saw themselves as being responsible to make choices that benefit the greater community from more water being available to everybody, and whether they felt a sense of obligation to change their ways to use different water sources. And all those factors, awareness, sense of responsibility, and obligation are termed pro-environmental behavior. So you're making choices that might not necessarily benefit you directly, but will benefit the greater community. What we did in terms of knowledge dissemination, we actually disseminated our results through multiple radio stations. And what was really interesting was that we actually got to local community, small radio stations, national radio stations. We also had a couple of TV interviews sharing the information around what those preferences were with a wider community. What we also plan to do towards the end of this year, maybe next year, is to run a workshop in the communities where we did the research to give them feedback and maybe have discussions on whether, based on what their preferences were, are they surprised that everybody thinks the same as they do, or just to have a general conversation about it and have it be a two-way thing between what we're designing and researching and what the preferences are, and then we can take it back and see how we modify things going forward.
Just to keep on that same line of questioning, when perhaps you're speaking to them on the radio programs, for example, what language do you use? Do you use English? Do you use the local languages? And also, what about the scientific words that perhaps the ordinary citizen may not understand? Do you have a way of simplifying those terms so that the ordinary citizen understands the message you want to pass through to them?
Very good question, Michael. And South Africa has 11 official languages, so that's a huge task. Unfortunately, they were all conducted in English. We were approached by radio stations that predominantly communicate in English, but the diversity was the communities in which they served. So we had a few Islamic radio stations that reached out to us. We had radio stations that were geared more towards your highly intellectual people, that the content discussed there would be technical and the audience would understand it. And then we had radio stations that were more for the general person. And we take great care to communicate it in a manner that it is understandable. So it's about building the base of what do I mean by alternative water source? Because some people don't even know what that is. What you mean? What are the different kinds of water sources? And I think what was really fantastic also was that the radio interviewers were also very good at asking questions in such a manner that we were able to unpack it and start at its small elemental components and then build the complexity as the interviews carried on. I do think that there is a lack in terms of language in how we disseminate on not a lack. There's a limitation and room for improvement for us to consider communicating in different languages. But I do know that Amber, also part of her work, looks at different forms. So not necessarily language, but but could we use art? Could we use music? Because you almost tapping into a completely different audience that would receive the same information, but through a completely different medium.
Dr. Amber Abrams, a colleague of Teboho and senior research officer at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, explains how important it was to have local residents involved as co-researchers in their study.
So to that end, certainly when we're running workshops where we know that participants might not be as comfortable in English, we have translation, and we're very lucky that we're growing a cohort of students who understand the science and speak multiple languages. And so we make sure that when we're working with groups where English is not their primary language, we have a student who's fluent in that language or it's their first language who joins us and works as so I'm talking about graduate students here who are essentially working with us as research assistants, but their language skills are really valuable and central to the work we do when we're running workshops. We also work with local residents as co-researchers, and that's one of the ways that we make sure that local residents can not only understand the topics we're speaking about and then translate them into locally meaningful languages, but also to that they understand that they're able to take the concepts that we use scientifically and they're able to make use of them in a way that makes sense locally. So the kind of science engagement and translation happens through our kind of co-researcher efforts. But not just through our co-researcher efforts. We make sure that in our workshops, there's efforts to think about translanguaging and what gets missed in the language translation as well. As Teboho really kindly said, we're working in a number of different communication mediums as well. So we work with, in the past, I've worked with theater. We're not working with that as much, but we work with comic books. We work with murals. We work with various kind of visual pamphlets. We work with design teams to help create infographics that explain things without language. We do a lot of co-learning workshops where we try to understand what people know about water and water resource use and recovery, and then try to share with them and learn from them about what they're already doing in these fields. We have learning field trips where we take local residents with us to spaces to think about the types of water reuse we're thinking about. We also do policy and evidence summaries for policy reviewers because we recognize that our work needs to be translated for the policy reviewers as well. As you can see, we're doing interviews. We do a few interviews a year. We do radio interviews. We have some TV appearances. We also work very carefully to create spaces called communities of practice, which can either be online or in person, and there are opportunities to share the work we do and create discussion, like Teboho said about her own PhD research. These communities of practices are opportunities for students to learn about how to translate their research into lay language as well. And there are also opportunities for people who are interested in our work to ask us questions and challenge us to translate the work into lay language. We create lay language newsletters as well. So we take the science articles that, standard science articles that have to be part of our kind of working KPIs, and we translate that into newsletters that are very visual. In fact, we've also been involved once in creating or co-creating a song around the work we do. So we do this in a variety of ways. And we've found that arts-based approaches are really exciting for people. You don't necessarily have to have all 11 and 12 languages if you consider South African Sign Language available if you're using visual mechanisms. So we do art installations. We've also been lucky enough to have a gallery allow us to do a First Thursday. I don't know if you know about those, but First Thursdays are the first Thursday of every month. Galleries open up and make spaces public into the evening time so that people who are working can move through the galleries. And there are often opportunities for people to kind of engage in different ways. So we've done a First Thursday event around water and people's relationships with water as well. So we're really trying to have a variety of creative ways to get people to engage and learn with us, because we also recognize that we're always learning from the people we're working with as well.
Thank you for that, Amber. If I could just get you to expound a little bit on the two aspects here, use of theater and use of comic books.
Sure. So the theater stuff has a long history in public health, and our use of it kind of drew on my own kind of public health history in clinical research and vaccine research, but we used it with youth to get them to think about their relationships with the environment they live in. So we did role playing. We took a story of a nature reserve that was protected through the kind of very dedicated work of a singular individual, and we role played that kind of discovery of a endemic plant species, and we got students to think about why spaces get protected, how spaces become kind of conservation areas or areas that we spend more environmental attention on. And we got people to think about, with the role playing in that regard, to think about their own relationships in their own neighborhoods to waterways, because we're trying to get people to really appreciate and value the waterways in and around them. The comic books are a wide range of different kind of visual tools to get people to understand, for example, in this one case that I'm thinking of, the relationship between stormwater and the retention and detention ponds that the city has to manage stormwater, and what those spaces could be if they were used in a kind of multi-use function as opposed to just being stormwater spaces. And so we used the comic there to get people to understand the water cycle and to understand how stormwater is part of the larger kind of groundwater cycle, and the infrastructures that are used to manage stormwater in high rain moments.
Teboho and Amber's work shows what's possible with effective science communication. But imagine the impact if every researcher had the resources to share their work in engaging ways. As we consider how to scale up science communication, one question comes to mind. What role can policymakers and government agencies play in supporting researchers in their work with broader audiences? Let's go back to Professor Bosadi to discuss this.
First of all, I think government needs to look into funding research more generally, because it's from research funding that you can also fund dissemination. In any research grant application, there's always an area where you have to put in how you're going to disseminate your research, because it's considered very important to let the ordinary citizen know about what, benefits they can get from research. And if they're sometimes there are hazards, and it's important for the ordinary citizen to know that as well. So it's very important to have appropriate funding to be able to disseminate, because dissemination is not cheap. The videos, for example, have to be paid for. So government can help fund research better. Generally, we don't have sufficient research funding in Nigeria and a lot of other Sub-Saharan African countries. That needs to change. They need to help fund research because of the greater goal, which is often long-term. And I think that's one of the reasons why, because they have a lot of other high priority concerns, they don't remember to see that research funding itself is important. Apart from the funding, also to make the channels available. So, for example, government owns quite a number of broadcasting channels. If they can allow, researchers to, use some of those channels free to be able to disseminate their research, that radio, television, their social media handles as well. Those should, it's another way of helping. Another thing that government can do is to make guidelines, help make guidelines available, help fund guidelines into, a lot of the research findings. So for example, the Federal Ministry of Health can work towards making sure that once a set of research findings is developed, they work towards either updating the existing guidelines or creating new guidelines so that it can be disseminated countrywide, and the healthcare workers can be aware of these interventions as well as the ordinary citizens.
That's all from us at Africa Science Focus today. If you want to find out more, head to the SciDevNet website. That's www.scidev.net. Today's show was produced by Alice Hurst, with editing by Ogechi Ekianyawo and reporting by Michael Kaloki. I'm Ogechi Ekianyawo. Until next time, it's goodbye. Africa Science Focus is produced by SciDevNet and distributed in association with your local radio station. This podcast was supported by the Science Granting Council's initiative, which aims to strengthen the institutional capacities of 18 public science funding agencies in Sub-Saharan Africa.